I don't think there's a faster or more effective way to transform a line drawing as with Sketchmarker. Here's a line drawing I did for a live demo a month or two back, and I thought I'd use it to demonstrate just how quickly and easily we can transform such a drawing. So that makes this technique ideal for street sketching, where we might just want to have 10 or 15 minutes longer in the location to make it really come alive by the addition of value. Let's start. I start by adding some low adhesive tape around the borders of my drawing. This totally depends on whether you like a neat edge or you prefer something a little more gestural, a little more jagged perhaps. Now, I'm using Copic sketch markers here, the brush end, and I'm using the neutral grey colour. So we're doing this monochromatically. We're not using colour, it's values of all the one colour. I start with my N6, which is the darkest value I'm going to use, and I reinforce the dark in those windows and on the lower floor of that right-hand building and this lamppost. I think it's always helpful if there are some values that are obviously very dark. You can confidently think, well, this is the darkest value I'm going to use. If we then apply at least some of those darkest values first, because we judge values off other values. And so if we establish what the darkest value is, it helps us pick the mid values more confidently and also what our lightest values are going to be. And this can save us having to go over and over and over making adjustments because some of our values don't line up with enough variation or too much variation between them. So I find it best to either start very dark or very light. In this case, it was easy to start very dark. Now, this right-hand side building, both because of the colour, the natural colour, the local colour of the dark shingles, also a good place to start because it gives me now a large area of darker value, which again, I can use to more confidently read what I do across the road where there is more light and therefore lighter values happening. Now I play around a little bit. I think this is an N4. And what I then do is I come over the top of it for some darker shadows and some highlights with N5. One of the great things though, particularly for a relatively small drawing such as this, is that we can cover large areas very quickly. And so the idea is to keep the relative values closer, or if we're not sure how dark to make a value, to keep it a bit lighter so that we can either choose to go darker over it or not, as the case may be. So the very bottom of this right-hand building, where there are reflections and shadows and bouncing light, I've left some areas quite light at this point because I don't want to work out the final values for those just yet. So now I come with the N5. So these pens are in a range of N0 to N10. I'll be using N0 to N6 in this drawing. And it really is a case of using some and then thinking, do I want to go lighter or darker for this next part? And then dropping down. I usually start just with the pen I start. When I want to swap to another one, I put it in my left hand. I'm right-handed and keep going. And eventually I end up with 4 or 5 or 6 pens bunched in my left hand, which does make it easy to choose them. So doing the shadow across the street, using an N3 for that, because that was a relatively dark colour. Now, one of the things to bear in mind is if we have strong sunlight, we want to try and have some fairly dark values up against it, some fairly dark shadows. And yet, if those values are going off into the distance, then we also want to allow for the fact that the closer objects are going to have relatively darker values than similar values that are further back. That if we want things to sit back and to come forward, we do need to manipulate our values in that way. And so I'm a little bit cautious with the church further down the back and the spire. I decide to go with an N4 for the darkest part. I discover that I don't have as many lines on my spire as there are in the photo, and therefore I don't have as many sides to gradate the values around. So I have to make a few adjustments for that. And I end up adjusting this tower and spire a few times in the course of the drawing. And I think that's an N1. So I go light on this tower at first, and then I add darker values to not the spire so much, but the tower underneath, because I feel like it's just a little bit too pale for its actual value in the scene. One of the advantages of including details such as this lamp in the extreme left is that it brings the depth of plane much closer to us, which means that the midground and foreground actually seem a lot further away than if it wasn't there. If we remove that lamppost, then the house on the right-hand side is the closest object, and that's some distance back. So we've immediately shortened our depth of plane by that much. And I think one of the characteristics of visual drama in a scene is depth of plane. It draws us in to travel through, and therefore the longer it is, the more we can be drawn in. So now I'm working the values on the other side of the street. We have lighter shade here, but we have some reasonably dark local colours as well, and yet there is a variation across both the various colours and the various building materials that are used as well. Now, because this is a fairly brisk gestural drawing, I forget how long it took me, but probably really not more than 30-35 minutes, then our marker work can be fairly brisk and gestural as well. It's worth buying, I think, if you haven't tried using markers in this way, 3 or 4 values of the one colour, keep it monochromatic, and have them with you, and just see just how much you can so quickly and easily really transform and get a great sense of 3 dimensions in your work. And it does save all of that hatching and cross-hatching, which, besides the fact it can be a bit confusing and a bit intimidating, and it can, if we overdo it, overwhelm a drawing and make it actually less easy to see things rather than more easy to see things, means we can use these markers, which are a much quicker and easier way to get the same sense of 3-dimensionality that well done hatching will give us. So here I am now just darkening this tower slightly. You're watching me do this at 1.5 times the actual speed. It took me around 15 minutes, maybe a fraction under 15 minutes to do this, but it always is a little bit faster if I'm not filming at the same time. And it's good to leave little sparkles of white paper coming through in various parts, because they give a great sense of light. And so it is nice to include those, and particularly if it's a high contrast sunny day and dark shadows, it's helpful to have those little sparkles here and there. Although equally, it's important to make sure that they make sense in the scene and they're not in odd places where there really should just be shadows. So I like to leave them, but then I stand up and look down and just look at my scene overall and work out, do any of those tiny white spots just look strange, and do I need to just cover them with a light value, with an N0 or an N1, which was consideration in this lower right corner. So I just put a little more shade on there, even more so in fact than there was in the reference, because I felt it was distracting as it was. This is a scene in the German village of Detmold, a quite picturesque village that has a lot of its later medieval buildings still around. Just add in a few bits of contrast to highlight some decoration and some local colour, and to add a little more interest to a fairly significant dark area. Still trying to make decisions what to do down here, just how dark to go. What do you think? It's certainly easier and quicker than hatching, and I think for many effects, a better way to go. So I used 6 values, but I could have quite easily done this using 4. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, what do you think? Here comes the tape coming off, and we get to see how it looks. And again, I managed to do it without tearing my paper. Do you think the drawing's been improved with the addition of the values? And if you'd like to have a go, I'll post the line drawing of this on my channel community page, and you can screenshot and print off a copy and have a go yourself. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, have fun.